All right, hello and welcome to episode 25 of Plays Well with Others, our podcast about building and participating in highly effective teams and actually enjoying doing it. As always, I'm your host, Andrew Moore, and I'm joined by my illustrious co-host, Jess Agnew. Today, we've got the first part of a two-part episode that I think has been coming for some time. So today we want to talk about how to interview and how to be interviewed. So in the next two parts, we'll talk about that. Today is how to interview. So I think a lot of you that are listening are either in the camp where you are taking interviews, you're going to interviews, and you're looking for the next gig, the next job, or you are a hiring manager who does the interviews and maybe you never quite got education, or you're not quite sure what works or what doesn't. Or maybe you're in a third camp where you have an interview coming up. It's your first interview. I remember mine and I had no clue what I was doing. So I just figured it out. So
I think a
just
lot of new managers get thrown into the deep end and they never get really trained on how to be an interviewer. So there's a lot of tips and tricks that I've learned through the years through trial and error that we'd love for you to never have to go through the process of learning.
yeah, and I've made some good hires accidentally because I've come out of interviews saying, "Wow, that was bad. I did not have my A game on that." And then I've made some less good choices for similar
Same.
reasons. Right. So the format on this is going to be a little bit different, similar to what you're used to in the other episodes. There's a lot of us talking back and forth at each other, but what we actually want to do is we kind of want to walk through from soup to nuts, start to finish. I have a role, and for sake of clarity, we're not gonna. This isn't a software engineer role. This isn't a product owner role. This is a generic
So
a generic role. You know, we won't get too deep into what specific skills we would be looking for in this hypothetical role. We just want to walk through focusing on our
yeah.
philosophies, which are going to be different in some cases, and the approach that we take to hiring. And so the first step of any hiring process is you've got a new candidate, we've got an application in from whatever platform you use, recruiter, whoever, you've got to prep. And so, Jess, where do you start there?
Yep. So, I mean, obviously, the resume is your starting place for thinking about this candidate, right? So, I like to pull the resume up on my computer. I'm old school like that on the computer. I like to highlight the things that I want to talk about. So, if there's something that I think is very weird or interesting or different, I want to talk about it. I'll highlight that. Some things that they mention that are skills that are required for the role I'm hiring for, I'll highlight those so I make sure that we talk about them. But that's just a reminder to me. And then the second thing that I do is I also look at it from the perspective of who am I looking for this role? Because I always think there's two sides to the candidate, right? There's the experience that they have, and then there's just the innate skills or who they are as a person that's going to dictate whether or not they're a good fit for the role. So experience in my book isn't everything. Sometimes I can teach what I need to somebody who is better at learning than I could hiring someone and retraining them if they've already done the thing before. So I'm also just looking for who I'm looking for as a person. Do they need to be personable? Do they need to be able to start a conversation with anyone and fill awkward silences and make people feel at ease? Are they someone who needs to be able to think through a problem logically? Are they someone that needs to know how to find answers so they're not constantly coming to, whoever they're working with asking for them to answer questions for them? They need to be able to find answers on their own. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about prior to an interview, writing them down so that I'm listening for keywords, key phrases, key thought patterns.
So I think I take a similar approach. I'm fairly analog. At least I used to be. Not having free printing at the office has vastly changed my approach to working through resumes. My favorite approach is to immediately go print off the resume, take my trusty pen and work through it and circle things that like Jess said, that are interesting, or sometimes, and recruiters, I think this is mostly for y'all. Mostly when I get, particularly developers or engineers, I get the recruiter resume that's like 42 pages long, and it includes every piece of experience since 1982 and has every JavaScript framework the person has ever worked in. That's rough because it
That
buries the
is,
lead. I have no idea why
yeah.
this candidate is good, what makes them tick. And so for those, mostly they get ignored. I skim it and I say, okay, well, they are a Java developer, in fact. Cool. So let's talk to them. So, well, maybe it's an effective tactic. I don't know. But what I'm doing is I'm taking that first pass to see, are there any things that stand out here that I really want to ask about, that I really want to know?
Hmm.
Sometimes it's things that are contradictory, or that like there's either too much detail or too little detail that makes me wonder, like, what's going on there? And mostly I'm
Have they
just circling
changed
stuff.
careers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have in the past, very early on in my career, I looked a lot at, do they have grammatical errors or spelling errors or formatting errors in the resume? And if there are too many of them, if there's a whole boatload of just like bad spelling and formatting, okay, there's a certain level
Unless it's
of,
glaring, I'm not worried about it. Like,
to be clear, it's
yeah,
never a
unless it's
decision
like
maker.
obvious.
Yeah, it's never a
Yeah.
decision maker. But if your resume's a mess, then I'm probably going to be focusing a little bit more on, do you actually care? Are you invested in this? Like, do you have some degree of attention to detail? Is this the best work you've got?
Yeah.
But it's kind of the same thing. Take the resume. If these days in 2023, I'm going out to look on LinkedIn. Are you doing anything out there? Is that updated?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's more detail on LinkedIn than there is on the resume, or vice versa. And so I can kind of look and compare. Sometimes it is like a career change. I can go see, oh, well, you used to be a roofing inspector for insurance companies. That's kind of interesting, but you didn't include it on your resume. And so your resume, I see you went to Nashville Software School and you don't have another job, so you're listing out your portfolio, which is cool. But if I see that, oh wow, you had this whole construction career before this, or you had this whole other thing, like, oh well, that's interesting. It's part of what makes you who you
Yeah.
are. So it's good to see. So anything else that you do pre-interview, or is it just kind
No,
of
I want to,
preparing yourself?
yeah, I just want to know what you've done. I want to know what I'm looking for. And I kind of like to go in a little bit more open.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, because I've had some people that I had made kind of first impressions with on a resume, and then went and talked to them and figured, oh wow, they're entirely different than what I was expecting.
That happened a lot to me early on, and so I don't consider the resume the be all end all. It gets you in the door somewhere, so it's wildly important, and there's
Mm-hmm.
a whole slew of resources on building a good resume that you should definitely read and do work with. But once you're in the door, the resume with the hiring manager is just as valuable to them as the description of the job is to you. You still need to ask questions, you still need to understand who this person is that you're talking to and get a human feel for it.
Yeah, and so that leads us to the actual day of the the big show. So again, we're talking mostly to you as hiring manager, person doing the interview in
Mm-hmm.
this episode. Come back there, come back next episode for the interviewee perspective. But there's value on both sides of this to get the full picture, right? So for me, a lot of times when I go into an interview, and it's a little bit different now that a lot of my interviews are over the phone or over Teams,
Mm-hmm.
but I immediately am trying to read the room. Like, is this person comfortable? Are they at ease? Because that tells me a lot about
Mm-hmm.
their personality. But it also tells me how much effort do I need to put into making the person feel comfortable. Because I don't
Yeah.
want to make a hiring decision based on what is already a very high nerve, high anxiety situation.
Yeah.
Like, I'm the
And I
first to tell
think
you I'll
there's
forget stuff just because I'm nervous.
And I think I think it's important to say as an interviewer, you never want to take one thing as the be all end all. So the resume shouldn't be that. Your first impression out the gate shouldn't be that. You want to look at everything holistically because you're trying to build the picture of an employee. And that's going to take some, detective work on your part in terms of listening and trying to engage with them. So the whole process of the interview is very important from, soup to nuts. And I encourage you not to have a snap decision at the very beginning that you then are trying to justify the rest of the interview. I encourage you to go in with an open mind, considering that, this is a human. They may have made a mistake or they may have showed up late because of horrible traffic. And yes, that all compiles into an image of this person, but I don't want you to take anything as a deal breaker right up front. I mean, obviously there are egregious things that are deal breakers, guys. Like I get that. But in a
Yeah.
normal average interview, don't take anything as, this, well, never mind, I'm not going to hire you. Let it become a part of a picture that you're building.
That's an excellent point. I've had candidates that completely ghosted me, and I've texted. Fortunately, in some of those occasions, they've come from recruiters, so I could text the recruiter, email the recruiter, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, what's going on?
And I had one candidate whose car died in the parking garage, and they had responsibilities, like they got kids to pick up, they got stuff to do, and so they had to
Yeah,
prioritize getting their car back up and running. Like they made it in plenty of time, but I didn't rate on the priority scale, which is fair enough. So we were able to
yeah.
reschedule and come back around. I've had candidates that get sick, kids get sick, family gets sick, stuff happens, right? So
Yeah.
try to be supportive and open minded in those regards.
And the last thing I'll say going into the interview is a lot of people have like their set questions that they ask. What's your greatest strength? What's your greatest weakness? If you could pick what you were going to do when you were 12, what would it be? I actually don't do that. I used to when I was a baby manager back in the day when I was hiring for the first time, but I don't really use set interview questions because I want to get a feel for it. And I know we'll talk more about this later, Andrew. But I think it's important to talk about as you're going into the interview because I know, Andrew, I think you have something that you do at the beginning of most interviews to kind of set the stage and get the interview started. And I think any manager who's been doing it for a while, you'll discover your thing that you do to kind of set the scene. But I like what you do, Andrew. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So generally, phone or in person, I'm going ahead. Like I said, you got to build the rapport, make the person at ease, get them coffee, water, whatever they need. Moving on, I kind of like to do an intro page, really, which is, hey, I'm Andrew Moore. I have forgotten to introduce myself in interviews until about halfway through. Like, hey,
I've
by the
done that too.
way, my name's Andrew.
Oh, my name's Jess.
I was, yeah. So I like to start out, hey, I'm Andrew Moore. I'm VP of Software Engineering at
Yeah.
thisplace.com. And we are here today to talk about a role of podcast administrator. I just made one up. But I want to make sure that they
It's a real
understand,
thing.
hey, this is who I am. This is why you're talking to me. I am the hiring manager of
Mhm.
this role. And we are talking about this podcast administrator role. Is that, and I will almost always ask, does that sound right to you? Because,
Are you here for the same thing? Did
well,
your recruiter send you to the wrong job?
sometimes I've not had it happen to me, but I've heard stories of it happening where, you apply to a
Yeah.
role and the wires get crossed somewhere and you show up and, oh, this is for the CFO position. Well, I'm not qualified for that. I'm the wrong person for this job.
How did I end up here?
Right. But it's helped me too, because I've been in the position where I've had, 3 or 4, 10 open roles at once that I'm trying to hire for. Like, hey, what do we
Yeah.
talk? Remind me, what are we talking about here? Uh,
What job are you here for?
yeah. Like, let's go ahead and
What
just
would you
get
say
that
you want to
open.
do here?
because I'd rather find out on the front end before I ask a question. Like, I don't know that. Why would I know that? Uh,
Yeah.
this is awkward. But make sure everybody's on the same page. Make sure that,
Yeah.
everybody knows, because people interviewing are probably interviewing for multiple companies. So if they're doing the thing where they're setting up multiple interviews on the same day, go ahead, give them the opportunity. If they've done research, here's your touchstone. We're talking about mortgage lending today, and we're not talking about healthcare or vice versa. And then, typically from there, I'll do the 30,000 foot Mach 3 overview of the company and the role and what I'm looking for and all that good stuff. And then just
Yeah.
say, before we dig in, does all that sound right? You have any initial questions, anything that I can help you with? Because I want this to be give and take, and I don't want to go too far before somebody says, yeah, you know what, this isn't for me, or I'm good.
I love that. And I think that's a great way to set the scene. And I just got through saying that I don't really follow a script or have like a set amount of questions that I do, but I also have a thing that I like to do at the beginning of interviews. And I love what Andrew did, and you should definitely do all that stuff first. I do then like to ask them as my first actual question to them, tell me about yourself. I've obviously looked at your resume. Tell me, like, highlight the things that you want me to see. Tell me the things that you think are most important, or how the thing, like, bring to light the things that you think are the most important for this role or that you're most proud of. And I kind of give them that open ended question because I think it's really telling to have people tell you what they want you to know about themselves, because you've seen their resume. So you have an idea of their history, but the things that they'll pick up on and things they'll tell you about tend to be the ones that they're the most passionate about, the ones that they're most proud of, the things that they think really show them in the best light. And it gives them an opportunity to show their passion and to talk about something that's interesting about them to you. And it puts them at ease, I also think, as well, because it's not a hard question first. It's not, what would you do in this very specific scenario, in this very specific thing? Okay, crap, am I answering this right? No, it's just an open ended. They get an opportunity to talk about something they've accomplished that they're proud of.
So that's an important question to ask, right? So, because I've gotten into,
It is.
I liked how you put, what would you highlight for me, or what makes you a good fit for this role? Because, and this is kind of one of those double-sided pieces of advice, whether you're the interviewee or the interviewer, you get into the boat of the person thinks that you just ask them to rehash their entire resume.
Tell their life story. And that's why
Right.
you should start it with, I've read your resume, so I know a lot of your history. What do you want to make sure I see?
Yeah.
What do you want to make sure is highlighted for me? What, if you could pick anything off of here you're most proud of, what would that be? Like, pick something in that scenario rather than tell me about yourself, because then you've opened yourself up to 15 minutes is now gone of your interview because they have rambled and they have no idea what you're looking for. So they cover everything.
Right.
You
And
do have to
it's,
be very specific.
yeah. And that puts, I have found that if you find the person that wants to tell you their life story from when they were born
That's going to
onward,
happen regardless.
it's going to happen, but then your choices are either let them carry on and you lose 15 minutes, and I've found that a lot of those people get more nervous the longer they go, because like the thoughts creep
It's
in of,
true.
have I talked too much, am I talking about the right things, and they get nervous and they've done it to themselves. But
Oh, no.
alternatively, you have to figure out a way to jump in without being like, golly, can you hush? It's, you got to be able to stop and like, hey man, I'm going to stop you there.
I'm going to stop you right there. That was too
Yeah.
much.
Well, I appreciate that. I've read your resume, and I do like your experience. Where I'm really interested in hearing more about is in this role or during this time or this
Hmm.
this project, and then let that lead you into the meat of the interview. And Jess, I know you have stories. I know we both have experiences.
We
I
all
want to
have stories.
I want to set this up because we're limited on time, and there's kind of a philosophical debate in how you direct an interview. Should it be
Mhm.
the rapid fire question model where you start high level and dig down, and just ask question after question after question? Or should it be more conversational? Or is there a middle ground? Dot, dot, dot. I don't know. But Jess, I think you've got one or two stories that I think set this up really well that make it a lot more consumable.
So one of my favorite people I think I've ever worked with was an architect at a previous mortgage company that I worked at. Potentially the smartest person I know. I really enjoyed working with him because not only would he wouldn't just tell you what you needed to know. He would ask you thought-provoking questions to get you to come to the conclusions that you needed to come to, which is a fascinating way to handle a problem and is something that I try very hard to employ with my children, actually, because it really is a growth and learning experience that is good for people and employees. But his interview methodology was really fascinating to watch because he, being the incredibly intelligent architect that he knew a lot. So when somebody came in for a position in a technical role, he would ask them increasing levels of difficulty question until he found where they hit their mark. And he kind of knew from experience, just the years of experience he had, kind of, okay, is this person actually a senior level like they're interviewing for, or are they maybe a junior level getting really close, or maybe they are senior level in some areas but they have some gaps that we're going to need to be aware of. And it was really impressive to watch him be able to feel those out. And I do think this is probably a strategy that works best for technical roles, not necessarily IT roles. It could be engineering and other capacities, or other roles that are very, very technical and there's very specific things you need to know. But it is a very interesting and I think good strategy. I do also remember watching candidates just melting in chairs because they can't answer the more difficult questions. But Joseph was always very, encouraging, like, it's okay that you can't answer. I'm just trying to gauge where your knowledge is, just trying to gauge where your understanding is. So it was a really interesting strategy to watch, especially coming from a role like myself where it may not be the best strategy for the kind of positions I was hiring for, but it was a really interesting strategy to watch.
Yeah, I think that's the point. Is you can you can drive things from a very rigorous, regimented approach, but sometimes you're going to lose out on the surprising skills. So
Yeah.
I've had some folks come in to interview for roles that I thought I had defined really well. I knew what I wanted, right? I'd written the job description, I had talked to other people, and then this person comes in and sits down and they completely upend my expectation. Like, well, you don't have the skill set that I was looking for, but this is really interesting.
But dang, you've got a different skill set I
Right.
like.
And like there's something here. I'm not sure what it is. And
Yeah.
had I not listened to that gut feeling, or
Hmm.
had I gone off of a very strict question set and not let them get off the rails a little bit and talk about other things, I mean, I'd never have uncovered those skills.
I think with all things, that strategy we just talked about is good in moderation, right? Because you can still get to a place where you can ask some of the questions that are important for you to understand their technical capability without that being the entire interview. That can be just a portion of the interview, which is why, time management in these interviews is very important. So if you have a couple things you want to do, you may need to curtail some things to make sure you get to all the ground you want to cover. So paying attention to time is very important in interviews as well. The other strategy I saw is one that I would actually recommend no one do. One of my first positions where I was ever involved in interviews, I wasn't the hiring manager, but I sat in on the interviews because I was just a knowledgeable resource in the organization and I did a lot of the new hire trainings. And it was a very difficult role that we were hiring for. And the hiring manager for this role that we were interviewing spent the first 15 minutes of the entire conversation telling them how awful the position was, how hard they were going to have to work, the hours they were going to need to put in, and just going on tangents about the difficulties within the organization, and then asking them point blank, are you willing to make the commitment to be here for this? Are you willing to come in for this? Are you willing? And basically making them beg to be considered for the first 15 minutes of the conversation. And then the last 15 minutes were, tell me your strengths, tell me your weaknesses, do this, do this. And it was so, like, there was no sense of who the person was when they left the room. There was a sense of what the job was, and it wasn't great. But there was no sense of who the person was when you left the room. And it really did set me up to go, well, I know I don't want to do that when I interview someone. But it was definitely one of those. I don't hate the idea of being honest with someone in an interview. You never want to lie about your position, because all you've done is gotten someone into a position that they're not going to be happy with. You always want to be honest. And I think there's definitely a time and a place for going, like, I want to level with you. When you come over here, it's not going to be easy. There's going to be hurdles that you're going to need to overcome. But that can all be done within that 30-foot overview that Andrew was talking about that you do at the beginning. Because if you do what Andrew said, where you give that 30-foot overview, you give very specifics on the positives and negatives, ask them if they have any questions, give them an opportunity to go, oh, that doesn't sound like a good fit for me. But it doesn't have to be a scare tactic and then they're begging for the role.
There's probably a very small subset of jobs in which you can do that effectively. The things that come to mind are all of the stories you read about the process to become a Wall Street banker. Like, you're going to make a boatload of money.
That might be the one.
And you've got people
you're
lined
gonna hate
up.
This. You're going to be rich.
Yeah. You've got people out of Harvard and Yale MBA programs lined up down the street to do this job. And everyone knows it's going to suck. Everyone knows it's terrible, but yet look at all the piles of cash. So you guys
can guess in the comments what the role was. I'll give you a hint. It wasn't that.
There's probably 99% of our jobs. You don't really want to start there. Unless you're just maybe he's really self-aware. He knows he's going to abuse that employee and doesn't want to hire again. So, like, sign up for this.
We'll talk about being the interviewee in the next episode, and maybe what you want to look out for, and red flags, maybe. giant red flag. But what I take away from that is I knew that I wanted to get a sense of who this person was, because, again, as I mentioned, the experience isn't the be-all, end-all. You can have 30 years of experience and still be bad at something. I wanted to also know who this person was. I want to understand. You can also have like a year and a half of experience and be fantastic. Some of the best people I've worked with didn't have a ton of experience in the role they were in. They just had some innate skills that were very well suited to the role. And this is obviously coming from an area that is very much more around project management and product ownership, because the technical skills need to be there to a certain level, but they can be learned on the job. So all that to say, I like to have a sense of what I'm looking for in terms of, okay, if I'm interviewing an administrator, then maybe I want to make sure that they know how to find what they're looking for, how to go searching for the answers. I want to know that they have the tenacity to, be frustrated and work through something in a logical fashion. I want to ask them the question of, do you use native capabilities or do you build something on your own? Because I want to know how they think. There's no right or wrong answer to that. I'm not going to go, oh, well, you answered that wrong, you're out. No, I'm just listening to understand how they think through logically a problem. And to me, it's more valuable for me in terms of, are they going to be a good fit? How do they think through things? Are they logical? Do they have a thought process that they can back up with a reasonable explanation? Or are they just kind of trying to give me what I'm looking for?
Well, I think that's what you're doing in all cases for all roles. Let me find out who this person is, how they think, how they approach problems, how they approach conflict. Because no matter what the job is, there's always going to be a degree of conflict. There's going to be challenges, whether it's, customer service at McDonald's or if it's, CFO. You need those skill sets to a certain degree. So as an interviewer, this is kind of the last point I want to offer on the content aspect, so we can land this plane in a timely manner. Actually, something for nothing. When you're interviewing, be respectful of time. It's not just your time that's being
Yes,
used, it's the interviewee's time as well. But something for
absolutely.
nothing. The aspect that you want to be thinking of is how is this person going to fit in the role that I have open, and then you can sprinkle those technical questions or more specific questions in on top of it to see, well, knows how to write code, cool, but gets in a fight with everybody on the team, probably not going to be a great fit. But leaving
So,
it out,
oh,
we've got to you've got to take into consideration this is two-way street. As we said at the beginning, this two-way street. So give plenty of time for questions, because that's going to
mhm.
what questions the candidate asks is going to do two things. One, it's going to tell you how much they went and researched your company or know about the role or know about you. I've had people that tell me all about the dog that I have because they found me and then found my wife and then found the dog, and it's a little disconcerting, but it does show some
That's maybe too
tenacity.
much.
It does show some tenacity. But the way that you're approaching this, and Jess, this is how you've laid this out, is try it the best you can to make the flow of the whole conversation make sense. Because we've all been
Mhm.
in those conversations or those interviews where it bounces all over the place. And
Yeah.
there may be some strategy to that, but in reality, don't make an already high anxiety situation worse by giving people whiplash trying to figure out, where am I going? Why are you talking about this now? That doesn't make any
What are we
sense.
covering?
Stay on topic, please.
Yeah.
And then lead into the questions. Let them ask good questions. Let them show that they're engaged. If they don't have any questions, then maybe prod a little bit. Like, well,
Mhm.
did you look into the company? Did you look into the industry? Because I know that's a concern for a lot of people in mortgage lending. Hey, the market's a little weird
Yeah.
now. Prod them a little bit, give
Yeah.
them an opportunity to think, oh yeah, that is a good question, let me ask more about that because I'm curious.
Yeah. And when the interview's over, I just have two quick things on
Mhm.
making a decision. The first one is I think you need to take into consideration not just the person you're interviewing, but the team that you're bringing them into or the people that they're going to be working with. Does the personality of the person that you've interviewed, do you feel like it's going to mesh well with the rest of the team that you already have? Do you feel like maybe the established roles that you already have on your team, do you have, is this person going to jive within that organization? And, that might be, you don't want too many people who are a certain, you know, very, very gregarious, or maybe you don't want, it varies differently based on the different team, but you want to think of them in context of the team you already have. And the second thing I would say is, with no other evidence to support if it's the right or the wrong person, sometimes going with your gut is an acceptable way to make a decision. There is a lot of nuance about the human psychology where we pick up on little things, the way somebody's eyes, do different things in an interview, the way their personality just feels with your own. Like, these things can be relied on, and you shouldn't feel bad going, well, I don't have like a solid, this is the reason I think this is the right person. But between the two candidates that are very, very similar, this one just had a better relationship with me on the call. I got a better vibe from them. That's not
Yeah,
necessarily the worst way to make a call.
I have hired, I can count 5 people off the top of my head that by all rights did not perform well in the interview. Like, from a technical aspect, like they didn't have the depth of knowledge that some other candidates. I've hired some candidates that blew my socks off technically, but for some reason they get there into the seat and it's just not jiving, right? But I can tell you 5 people. I won't, but I can tell you 5 people that I've hired that I remember one specific case. Like, my head wasn't in the game, I just wasn't feeling it, I was tired, whatever, and I was on the phone and I was basically giving them the answers to my questions and how I answered and how I asked the question.
Oh
I'm
no.
like, I just want you to perform well, and they basically gave me back the answer I was looking for. Like, yep, good, check, go. And they turned out to be some of the best people that wound up not working for me currently, but they're off being vastly successful engineers, or so in a lot of those two, I can't go down that rabbit trail right now. There's an episode that I want to do in the near future about building experience and how we build experience as engineers, as professionals, whatever. But there's a lot of people that have come in with no experience that didn't do great in the interview because they didn't have the technical chops, but there's
Yeah.
just something about them that they turned out to be the secret sauce. So
So the last quick story I'll tell is I
all
did
right.
interview someone over the phone only, never talked to him in person. I was hiring him for a technical writer role. I never met the person, never met him in person. We did one interview together, and I just knew it was the right person. And there, I did the same thing I normally do. I had the resume, I had the highlighted things, I had the things I knew I was looking for. I've never had anyone almost verbatim give me back the things I was looking for, but this guy did. I hired him in, and literally he was such a perfect fit. It was one of my favorite hires ever. You know who you are if you're listening, but he was just fantastic for the role. And it was
Yeah.
so weird because he was like, "You're not going to do a face interview?" I was like, "I just don't need to. Like, this is the right position for
Yeah.
you." And it was. Not all of them work out that way, and it's okay that not all of them do. I've had some bad flop hires too,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes you just know that it's the right person, and that's good enough.
Yep. Yep. So we're gonna have to leave it there. There's a we've even got more on the outline over here that we didn't get to because this is such a meaty topic. But come back on the next episode if you made it this far. If you're an interviewer, give us some feedback. That we've talked about a bunch of topics on this podcast about things that they're nuanced. So there's a
Yeah.
boatload of techniques and strategies and approaches. Let us know if you're a hiring manager that you do something that we didn't mention that's really worked out well for you,
Yeah.
especially if you're an interviewee that saw something that was really interesting. You know, did it make you feel better in the interview? Did it make you feel worse? How did that work? Call out some of the interesting stories you've had in the interview space and let us know, because again, there's no one right answer. There's a bunch of different right answers, and you got to figure out which one's the most right for you, for the candidate, for the company. So again, if you've made it this far, really appreciate you listening. Really appreciate you tuning in. If this is your first episode, welcome. If it's not, appreciate it. Definitely go back, listen to our other
Yeah.
episodes. Give us a like, comment, subscribe. We're over on YouTube in 1080p HD, so give us a subscription over there. Hit the bell. All of the song and dance, all the jazz. Go ahead and do that now before you get too far away and move on to the next podcast. But as always, this is Plays Well with Others. Thanks for listening.